You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "you are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way using food. Starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Joel Feren on the show today. Joel, welcome to Nutrition Experts.
Thanks, Mathea. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to have you on the show and share your expertise with my tribe. Let's talk a little bit about, you're obviously not from America. Where do you live? And tell us a little bit about what you do.
No, I think my accent's probably a dead giveaway. So I'm actually based in Australia, in Melbourne. And I've been a dietitian now for 6 years. I mean, some of your listeners may have seen me pop up on their social media feeds. I guess I wear a number of different hats. It's quite funny. I often find it really difficult to describe what I do, particularly to people who don't practice in the nutrition space. So I wear a number of different hats. I consult in private practice. I consult to the food industry. I do some media work as well. I'm actually a media spokesperson for the Dietitians Association of Australia. I do a little bit of work in aged care. I'm fortunate enough to be invited on various podcasts. Yeah, it's no 2 days are ever the same. And I think that's what I love about being a dietitian, and certainly love about my role is that opportunities will pop up. And I know when I first graduated, I had no idea what my career might look like. And almost 6 years later, it's certainly not what I had intended. I always get really enthusiastic about career prospects and even just talking about my career path and journey, because I think it's probably not too dissimilar to a lot of other dietitians who are sort of working in the consulting space.
So you don't actually work at a hospital. You kind of have your office and you do consulting and different things?
Yeah, so my office will vary. Sometimes it's home office, sometimes it's the family home, sometimes it's my private practice clinic. But you're right, I don't actually work in a hospital. When I went into dietetics, I actually thought I did want to work in a clinical setting, but having done my clinical training when I was back at university, I realized that it just wasn't for me. So I think when I graduated, while I was open to opportunities, I think that was the one I did close myself off to. I was forced to look at other options. But yeah, I love that my home office is a really relaxed environment, and it's something I can wear my Trekkie ducks in, and I don't have to get dressed up in a suit or nice clothes, and can just sort of do my work when I like.
So what's the favorite thing that you work on? Like, what's your favorite topic or nutrition specialty kind of thing?
At the moment, I love working in food industry. I love working on media and nutrition communications. I think that's sort of my forte. But I think one of the things that I've been really fortunate enough to do is actually develop recipes. When I was 16, I actually wanted to be a chef, and my parents talked me out of it because of the working load and the hours. And I think now I'm sort of able to marry two worlds, because I'm able to marry my love for cooking, but also marry my love of nutrition together. So often while I've just talked about my home office, sometimes I joke that my home office is actually my kitchen, because I get to cook and develop recipes. So it's a lot of fun. I get to do it in my own time, at my own pace. And it's certainly a thrill. I think friends sometimes shake their heads and think, geez, what on earth does Joel do for a living? But the other week I was making peanut butter slices and peanut butter smoothie bowls. Today I've got to make a peanut butter pancake mix. So as you can see, I'm actually doing work for a peanut butter company. But I've been lucky enough to work for one large corporation and actually develop some recipe books for them. So that's a real thrill from my end, that I get to be able to cook for a living.
That is something that probably a lot of dietitians, you mentioned not being so clinically focused or working in the hospital. I get that really well, because clinical is not my strong suit either. And I love food. I love cooking. I love making recipes. So that is just the dream there to me to work. So can you talk a little bit about your health journey and how it influenced what you do as a dietitian?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It's funny when I meet other dietitians, they often talk about their health journey, and I guess everyone's had a little bit of a different one. And I know Andy, the RD, who's one of my idols, and we've done some work together on YouTube. He often talks about his journey, and he sort of came from the other end that I did. He was quite a skinny kid back in high school, and he had a poor diet, and he wanted to gain weight, whereas I was always the overweight kid. I always had an interest in food and to some extent nutrition, but I guess I really wasn't that healthy now that I reflect on my childhood. And I probably had a really unhealthy relationship with food. I'm not quite sure where that came from, if that was sort of directly from influences being family or outside of that, community or even friends. But I think now when I meet with private practice clients I think the biggest thing that I can do to help someone is actually improve their relationship with food. So I take very much a non-diet approach. I don't fully subscribe to Hayes or even the non-diet approach, but I love the idea of eating mindfully and knowing that all foods can form part of a healthy diet. So I've really changed my philosophy, if you like, around food. I see a wonderful opportunity for dietitians to differentiate themselves from some of these other nutrition gurus who talk about do's and don'ts. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity for dietitians to help people improve their relationship with food. So I guess from my end now at the age of 34, my relationship with food is probably the best it's ever been. I love to eat. I love to cook. And I love that all foods can form part of a healthy diet. So I guess that's sort of in a nutshell my health journey. And that's what probably drove me to becoming a dietitian in the first place, sort of, wanting to improve my health and wanting to improve that relationship with food.
So you said you were a little bit of an overweight kid. What happened to change basically your habits or whatever? Did you lose weight? Did you start exercising? What kind of things did you do along your journey?
I was actually always quite sporty as a kid. I was always one of those kids that used to play Aussie rules at lunchtime or soccer at lunchtime. I used to do things on the weekend, but I always did battle with my weight. I think I just ate too much and I probably just ate the wrong types of foods. Something that I made a conscious decision once I finished high school, so at the age of 18, to lose weight, and almost scary to admit that I really did it in the wrong way. I lost about 20 kilos, so that's the equivalent of probably almost 45 pounds in only a few months, and it was almost like a starvation diet. So I shake my head at myself sometimes and I think, geez, why did I do that? But I think I was just so desperate to drop the weight. So I was eating 2 meals a day and avoiding carbs, because that was sort of the talk around then back in the early 2000s where, carbs were getting a bad name and obviously that's still lingering. But, I dropped a lot of weight and obviously didn't do it in the healthiest way. Probably in a few years after that, my weight sort of, I like this idea of a set point. It got to where I think it should be. So for the last 10 years or so, I've actually been fairly weight stable. It's something that I'm acutely aware of at times. And if I do let myself go, sometimes I need to rein myself in again. But I like this idea that I can eat normally. I don't have to go on a starvation diet. I certainly don't have to avoid carbohydrates. I actually love carbohydrate-rich foods. I think there's so much more than a single nutrient. Yeah, I sometimes admit that to my clients who want quick results. And I think, coming from that shared experience where I didn't do it in the right way, I think actually resonates with my clients. And I think it's about having a long-term view of health. It's not just about weight. Yeah, I think that's influenced how I practice. It certainly influenced my philosophy as a dietitian. And as I said, it probably was one of the factors in me actually becoming a dietitian in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned your clients because I believe it's important for us to express to them how whatever stage they're going through, as long as they're making forward progress or, little changes, they're going to add up. And then it's completely normal to, have some frustration, to have some days when nothing seems right. But it's like you said, the long-term staying on the path is an important message to convey.
Absolutely. It's about creating that new normal. I think it's about creating those healthy habits that are going to be sustainable in the long run. And I think it's actually about teaching people how to eat. And that might sound a little bit strange, but actually giving them, the tools to navigate sort of their nutritional journey, because there are always going to be things that pop up, be it family events, social events, Christmas, and even at times of grief. Our diet's constantly changing. So I think if we can get our diets right to some extent, I don't want to say right because there's no right or wrong. I guess if we can focus on those healthier habits more often than not, I think you're right. Those changes do add up, and then people will see those results. And I think sometimes we hang our hat on that one noticeable change, be it weight, but I like to look at the things that we can't see. How is someone improving their blood sugar control, someone reducing their cholesterol, someone improving their blood pressure. I think these are the changes that I want to see. It doesn't necessarily have to be weight. I think there are so many more objective measures of success that we can be focusing on.
Yeah, non-scale victories type thing, yeah. The things that, you're right, make the difference in the long run. What I find is a lot of times my clients or customers don't always know how to cook. So they've grown up and they've gone through a process where they have either had food made for them, or they used frozen meals, or they would eat out so much, and they never learned the process of making a meal, reading a recipe, or cooking. Do you find that's pretty common, or?
Absolutely. And I actually love working with those types of clients because I think there's so much we can do. And I think at the moment, there's all these cooking shows and all these recipe books, and people just don't really have the time. I meet a lot of people who work long hours and they get home maybe 7 p.m., 8 p.m. even, and the last thing they want to do is actually cook. So I kind of feel like it's my job to help make their life a lot easier. And it's funny because I actually do think that frozen meals have their place. And I certainly am a big supporter of frozen vegetables. But I think at the end of the day, if we want some key elements on the plate, be it some lean protein, some low GI, high fiber carbohydrate, and also some veggies, I think there's so many options at our disposal. My wife and I often joke around that, one meal of the week is like frozen night. So we've got things like frozen fish fillets or frozen veggie burgers in the freezer. And, we've always got fresh veggies in the crisper, but we've always got a safe option there in frozen veg. We've always got a can of lentils or chickpeas in the pantry. So you can actually create a wholesome, balanced meal very, very quickly. So people don't necessarily have to be a master chef to create a nutritionally balanced meal. And I think that's the type of message that I like to get across to my clients. You can still eat well and you can still eat tasty foods, but you don't have to spend a long time in the kitchen.
So that leads me to my next question. Let's talk a little bit about your Get Your Man in the Kitchen campaign. So tell me what started that, why you decided to do it, and how it's going.
It was early 2015. And look, I guess I always felt that there was an opportunity for me to pinpoint my communication towards men, being a male health professional, but also being, that male dietitian. I think the sarcastic nutritionist refers to male dietitians as unicorns, because we're definitely few and far between. But I think it's interesting. Working with a lot of men, you're right. I think women often do most of the cooking, be it their wives, their partners, or their mothers growing up. I know there was some research done by the Australian Dietitians Association looking at behaviours of men in the kitchen or just in the home. And I think a lot of men have an interest in cooking, but they just don't get in the kitchen. So I guess the Get Your Man in the Kitchen campaign was really just to encourage men just to have a crack. It's such an Australian term, just to have a crack. But just to get in the kitchen and whip up anything. It could be anything from eggs on toast to something a little bit more elaborate, spaghetti bolognese or roast with all the trimmings. It doesn't matter what it is. It's really just about encouraging men to get in there and cook something healthy, because once again, the evidence actually shows that when people cook at home, they tend to have better balanced meals. They tend to consume less fat, less sugar, less salt. From our perspective, I think that's a wonderful outcome. There's a the social media hashtag. I predominantly use Instagram to get that message out there, and it's great that it's resonating amongst other dietitians. It would be great to get some further traction in the wider community. But I think slowly but surely, men are taking a little bit more ownership and sharing some of those household duties. I always tell my wife that she married really well because I do 95% of the cooking. So she's quite lucky in that regard. But I certainly know in my friendship circle, a lot of my mates really enjoy cooking, particularly barbecues and smoking their meat. So I think that's a great thing that they can do. And I think it's about all of us encouraging, men of all ages just to get back in the kitchen. It's really about getting back to basics. I can't stress that enough. I mean, there's really not much to it other than just having a crack.
Honestly, as a woman, I would love it. I love it when my husband cooks. I love it when he makes the whole meal. When I come home and he's got the salad and he's cooking on the grill and everything's ready, that is so nice. So I'm all for your Get Your Man in the Kitchen campaign. I noticed you mentioned also that you are a media spokesperson for your Dietetics Association, and you can tell me what that is again. Tell me about that and what led you to that and what you typically do in that job.
Yeah, look, I took on that role in June 2016, so a little over 2 years ago now. And it's funny, when I was at uni, we talked a little bit about media, but it was something that I never thought I would put my hand up for. I never thought I'd feel comfortable. And it's funny, I don't know if I actually ever do feel comfortable talking in front of the media, but I think these days, we had a brief chat about it earlier, the proliferation of some of these nutrition gurus and people who want to put out a non-evidence-based approach to diet, to food, to nutrition. I think we've got to counterbalance that and actually get our credible voice heard too. So I think there's a wonderful opportunity for dietitians to be out in the media. I put my hand up initially for a few media interviews, and an opportunity arose in the middle of 2016 to become a media spokesperson for the Dietitians Association of Australia. And I thought, yeah, why not? Let's have a crack. As you can see, that's a bit of a theme. So yeah, I put my hand up, and I was lucky enough to get that role. And I'm often contacted by journalists who want to chat about different topics. I did one yesterday on nutrition in the senior years. And I guess if I've got any area of expertise, it's probably geriatric nutrition, which we haven't really talked about yet, but it was something that I'm really passionate about and often asked to speak about. Some of the media topics will vary. I've recently done some things on paleo diet and often asked about coconut oil, and I've talked about hemp seeds, and the list goes on. So it's just amazing what's out there. And I think being a nutrition professional, we've got to actually stay on top of some of these nutrition trends, and to sort of be able to give our 2 cents worth to the conversation. So it's something that I really enjoy. Don't know if I've ever felt truly comfortable talking to the media, but I find it a really good challenge. And I think I've got a science background, and, I like the nitty gritty of science, but I think our job as dietitians is really to dumb it down so that the everyday Joe can actually make sense of it. So yeah, I think there's a bit of an art. There's certainly a bit of a science to how we talk to the media. And look, I'm constantly learning, constantly evaluating, and hopefully I will hone my skills in the future. But it's certainly something that I love doing, despite some of the challenges.
So if a dietitian is interested in doing more media, you have any tips for them on how to maybe get some opportunities or even things not to do?
And this is probably, once again, a bit of a story of my career so far, but I think it's about putting yourself out there as much as you can. I've always had an interest in media. I love politics, and every day I read the newspaper. Love to say from cover to cover, but I probably don't have the time these days. But, be it world affairs, politics, there's a strong interest there. So, and I think these days with social media, particularly Twitter, there's a wonderful opportunity to contact journalists directly. And I think if you've got a burning question or something that you really want to discuss, is actually pitch to some of these journalists. Don't be embarrassed. Don't feel bad if you're going to get knocked back or you're going to be or your response is not going to be responded to, just keep putting yourself out there. And the other thing as well is, and this is a lesson that I learned very early on, is, write something, put it out there, shop it around. If it gets picked up, great. If it doesn't, well, post it on a blog or give it to a community-based newspaper.
Yeah, I love the idea of just getting your message out there. And the more voices we have out that are speaking evidence-based and presenting, truthful information, the more people realize that we are the nutrition experts. And I think that's definitely what we want as a profession. So you mentioned a little bit that you have a little bit of a passion for geriatric nutrition. What about geriatric nutrition makes you excited or interested in it or whatever?
There's nothing romantic about working in an aged care environment, but I think there's a crucial role for dietitians to play in the management of someone who's a little bit older and particularly with dementia. And I see a lot of residents, patients, if you like, with dementia. And I think often nutrition is that forgotten piece of the puzzle. So I've been lucky enough to have worked in aged care since I graduated. It was actually my first job, my first real dietetic job out of uni. I think food is so much more than a source of nutrition. It's also about promoting quality of life. If I take my clinical hat off, I think some of the residents that I see, they might be end stage, but I think there's such a role for food to play at the end of their life. And I'm really big on particularly nutrition and palliative care because no matter what someone's dealing with or facing, I think that providing something that's not only nutritious but also ticks the box of enjoyment, I think is really a wonderful thing. And I love the idea that food can evoke certain memories. And I think there's really a wonderful opportunity, particularly at the end of someone's life, is to provide those things that are not only going to be nourishing for their body, but also nourishing for their soul. And it sounds so cliched, but it's something that I'm truly passionate about. But if we get to the heart and soul of the dietetic side of things in aged care, I think there's a wonderful opportunity to help, as I always say, keep the meat on someone's bones, because we know that some of the negative effects of muscle loss in the elderly can change the fuel supply of the brain. It can lead to further deteriorations of their cognitive state. And we know that people who are at risk of malnutrition or who are already malnourished have higher mortality and morbidity rates. So I think there's a wonderful opportunity for dietitians to play in that role. So while it might not be, a sexy environment, I think it's certainly a very rewarding place to work in.
Well, I think that just shows how much you love food, because I think if you think about palliative care, if you think about end of life, you're thinking about different textured diets or, different choices. And you're right that food brings back memories and comfort. And I was like chicken noodle soup. You just love to have that when you're sick. Maybe that's what your mom gave you when you were a kid. So, having the opportunity to have those foods that you can eat at that point is very comforting. So I think that's awesome, because I don't know that people think about it on that level beyond you need a pureed diet or you need a, thick and liquid or whatever. So.
Yeah, I'm often having that discussion, particularly with clinical staff, is sometimes we've got to treat the person rather than the condition. I think, particularly with an older population. I mean, I know I was just having this conversation with my grandmother, who's in her early 80s, who's actually caring now for my elderly grandfather, who's in his late 80s, and my grandfather unfortunately has Parkinson's disease and likely Lewy body dementia, and she was concerned about the sugar that he adds to his breakfast cereal. And I was like, for goodness sakes, just let him eat. He enjoys it. He's been eating it for all his life. I think it's the least of his worries. But if I can give him a little bit of enjoyment, I think from my perspective, that's a wonderful outcome. And if he has some negative consequences as a result of adding a little bit of sugar to his bowl of Wheaties in the morning, then so be it. But I think it's about taking that clinical hat off sometimes and actually just giving somebody what they want. I always say, sometimes we need to shift the goalposts when it comes to food and nutrition in the elderly. We've got to almost treat these residents, treat these patients like they were our own family, and what would we want to do for those family members who may be struggling with those types of issues.
Okay, so a little bit different topic. We'll switch a little bit. Since you're in Australia, I wanted to ask you, what would dietitians in the US think is weird or different about being a dietitian in Australia? Is there anything like that?
I know you posed this question to me earlier and offline, and I'm really not quite sure how it differs. I mean, I know our dietetic guidelines slightly differ to yours. I think they're a little bit more prescriptive when it comes to probably the don'ts, talking about the foods to avoid, as opposed to the dietetic guidelines in your neck of the woods that talk about having no more than 10% of your energy intake derived from things like total fats and or at least saturated fats and added sugars and the like. But I'm not quite sure if the job of a dietitian differs all that much to a job to being a dietitian in America. I'm not quite sure what your other guests have posed to you before, or your own thoughts on this type of question. Happy to have a chat about it, but it'd certainly be interesting to hear your comments.
Yeah, that would be. I've never been to Australia, so I don't know. It would be interesting probably to think about the different foods, as you mentioned, kind of not necessarily the guidelines, but maybe the meals. I know in Britain they have tea, at certain times of the day, and that's part of a daily routine that you would need to incorporate if you were working in that country, if that was something that a person was interested in. So I just thought it would be interesting to know, is kangaroo a big meat that you guys eat, or?
I'm happy to discuss those types of questions. So if we're looking at specific foods, I mean, I think we're the only country in the world that eats the animal on its coat of arms. I've never really been able to get my head around eating Skippy.
So what animal is that? Kangaroo? Oh.
That's the kangaroo. Sorry, I thought that Skippy was a television show in the 1970s and 80s, and I think it gained worldwide notoriety of a little kangaroo that went hopping around. It's incredibly lean, actually, and it's a wonderful source of iron. But it's funny, a lot of the clients that I see in private practice, they don't tend to eat it, so I'm not quite sure if it's more of a rural thing, or people outside of Melbourne tend to eat it more than Melburnians. But it's an interesting option. I have tried it. Me personally, I've actually just sort of moved over more to a vegetarian-based diet. So I'm actually no longer eating meat. So if you put in front of me a kangaroo fillet, I will probably decline. But look, it's certainly another option that people can have, and being a lean protein source, that's obviously a wonderful source of other micronutrients. I think it can certainly play a role in someone's diet.
So Joel, thinking about the stuff we've talked about, like media spokesperson, geriatric nutrition, non-diet approach, getting your man in the kitchen type thing, what types of tips or final thoughts would you have that the listeners could use in their day-to-day life, that they could either change habits or just something to think about? Any sort of overall tips that you might have?
It's about being proactive, getting a voice out there. Also thinking outside of the square. I actually recently wrote a blog post because it's been almost 6 years since I graduated. So I sort of wanted to write a reflective piece on my job and my career so far. And I know when I went to uni, I think we touched on it earlier, a lot of the focus was more on a career in clinical or community or even food service. There was very little talk about the role that dietitians can play in food industry, in the media, or even developing a voice or a presence on social media. When I think about my role, and as we sort of joked about earlier, I find it hard to describe exactly what I do because no 2 days are the same. There are so many job opportunities out there for dietitians, and sometimes it's about creating your own path, and it might not seem like it's the norm. I think there's so many other things that we can be doing, from corporate health to recipe development, like I mentioned already, to obviously media and social media and all the opportunities that can present as a result of being out there. So I think what I would recommend to people who might be looking to forge their own path or even still at university is, be open to opportunities, but put yourself out there as much as you can, because you never know what it can lead to. Very quick story. I was lucky enough to be asked to present on a TV show early last year. And I think as a result of that one experience, it's really changed my career. So I'm very grateful to have had that experience. And I think if I would have closed myself off to, being in the media or being on social media, I wouldn't have had, my career wouldn't look as it's looking now. I think I'd probably be working in private practice, doing my little bits in aged care, but probably wouldn't be having as much fun as I'm having now. Yeah, put yourself out there, see what opportunities present. You can always say no, but I'm a bit of a yes man, and I think sometimes that pays off.
Yeah, just give it a try. What's the worst that could happen is what one of my friends said yesterday.
Exactly. I mean, that's a question I often pose to my clients. If you don't like a food, what's the worst that can happen? It's the same goes in with jobs. What's the worst that can happen? You don't like it, you don't go back, you try something new. But I mean, I don't know how this is over in America, but I know in Australia, particularly in Melbourne, there are so many new grads who enter the field each and every year, and there are just so few clinical jobs out there, so few community jobs, that I think we need to keep reinventing ourselves and finding our point of difference. And as I said earlier, my point of difference was a little bit more obvious, being a male, but yeah, from the recipe development to the media side to consulting to food industry, I've sort of been able to create my own little niche. And I think it's really important that other dietitians also do the same. So that's my little motivational talk this morning. Well,
thank you.
Pleasure.
Joel, I like to ask all my guests, what's your favorite food? Obviously not kangaroo.
Yes, you got me there. Look, I'm probably going to have to say ice cream. I can probably eat ice cream all year round. So it's not necessarily a summer food for me. It's a winter and fall and spring food as well. So
ice cream is year round.
Sorry?
Ice cream is year round.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So that's probably my favorite food amongst others. So it was a little bit hard to narrow down, but let's go with ice cream for this one.
What about flavor of ice cream? Which flavor?
Yeah, look, I'm a sucker for chocolate. Double choc, triple choc, choc chip.
With stracks, brownies, cookies, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. I might even treat myself to an ice cream after the interview.
Now that we talked about it, I made you hungry.
Is that an acceptable breakfast choice?
I think all foods can fit, so sure.
Okay, we sing from the same book.
All right, Joel, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know my listeners learned a lot about different topics that we talked about. So if listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, sure. So jump on my website, thenutritionguy.com.au, or my social media handle, particularly Instagram, where I am mostly found is _nutrition guy. So feel free to connect, say hi, and I'd love to start a conversation.
Post a picture of your man in the kitchen, right?
Absolutely. With the hashtag Get Your Man in the Kitchen. Quirky apron is optional. I know it's sort of my thing on social media, but I'd love to see you encouraging all the men in your life to just, whip up something and have a crack. Thank you so much for inviting me along. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope your listeners got something out of it.
Thanks, Joel. Well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.